Good evening. We're going to get started. It's a little after 6 o'clock. I just want to do a quick check here. The screen should be showing. Let me just see, 1 second. If you would, if you can hear me, and if you can see my screen, if you would just raise your hand. There's a little button on your toolbar there. All right, I see all the hands going up. Great. For those of you that were here last week, you realize there's a little bit of a snafu, so I just want to make sure we're all on board tonight, and it appears we are. So let me just put those hands down. Great. There'll be some time at the end for a little bit of question and answer. It's going to be a pretty full evening. I want to go over quite a bit tonight, and so inevitably we'll miss some things, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, and I'll do my best to get to all of those toward the end. Let's get started. Talking about queen maladies. What does that mean? Well, issues that you may confront with your queens, and mostly I'm going to focus on sort of after your hive is up and running, so things you might encounter after you come through winter or maybe late summer, if you've started a new colony in spring, things such as that. And what are some of those issues that you might find? What we'll be talking about this evening, we'll be talking about queen quality. Some issues you might encounter are super seizure, swarming, absconding, queenlessness, laying workers, drone layers, and requeening. That's a very long list of things to try and cram into to an hour-long talk. But hopefully we'll get through all of them, and again have some time for question and answer at the end. So let's first, before we even get into any of these, make sure that we're all on board here, and I sort of have a sense of where folks are coming from. Let's first, again, I've got my usual polls here. For those of you that are repeat visitors to these webinars, I apologize for flashing up some of these same polls, but it helps me understand where folks are coming from and their experience level, so it helps me sort of target the level to talk. If you could just take a couple of seconds here to answer this question: how long have you been keeping bees? You're still researching. You're starting this year. 1 year, 5 years or less, or more than 5 years. And I'll close it. I've got 91% of you in. I'll close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We've got let's see, about it's pretty evenly distributed actually. 28% started this year, 32 are 1 year under their belts, and 28 have 5 years or less. And then we've got a total of 12% scattered in the still researching and more than 5 years. Let me share those with you real quick so you can kind of get a sense of where we all are. All right. Now, again, bear with me. This just sort of helps me again. Let's, if you could, just take a second here to answer this one. How many colonies do you have? You don't have any right now, so this would be those folks that are still researching or maybe just getting started this year. 1 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 20, or 20 plus hives. And we'll close it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ooh, 99% of you cast a vote. Thank you very much. Let's take a look at those. We've got 61% of you that are between 1 and 4 hives. You can see the rest there. Some none right now, just getting started. Perhaps you're still doing some research, so that's good. I'll hide that. And one last question, I promise. Have you ever requeened a colony? Yes or no? Pretty straightforward. We've got 63, 79, 81%, 88%, and we'll close in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 99% voted again. Thank you. 74% said no. 26 have said yes. Great. So that just really let me show you those real quick. That just gives me a really good idea of, again, where everyone's coming from and where I should be going with this talk. So let's first begin with a little bit of bee biology. I'm just going to skim over this. I don't want to take a lot of time with it. And this is the life cycle of the bees that you would find in your colony: a queen, a worker, and a drone. And we're only going to focus tonight on this part up here. And these are averages. An egg is an egg for 3 days before it hatches into a larva, regardless of the type of bee it's going to develop into. In the case of a queen, it's a larva for 5 days, and then it's capped for 8 days. And so from the time the egg is laid to the time you have an emerging queen, a queen emerging from that cell, is a total of 16 days, give or take a little bit. Now, of course, keep in mind that that's a virgin queen, an unmated queen that's going to be emerging from that cell. So we still have mating flights and things like that to go on. A little bit more about the queen life cycle. Of course, they come from fertilized eggs. Their physiological development is really dependent on the diet that they are fed. And this is an important point because when we talk about queen quality, this plays a role. We want to raise our queens with good young bees that will produce a good quality diet for those developing queens. So this is a very important aspect. And these are sort of large ranges. Virgin queens usually go on a mating flight 3 to 20 days after emergence. So 20 days, that's a really long time. I think the average is actually closer to about within the first week after that virgin queen emerges from her cell, she'll go on a mating flight. But there's a lot of variables here. Weather. Is it storming rain for a week on end, which may delay her ability to go on a mating flight? Temperature, things like that. Generally speaking, she'll mate with 12 to 15 drones. And after she comes back to that colony, if she makes it back alive and well, she'll begin egg laying anywhere from 4 to 37 days post-emergence. Again, this is sort of a range that I found when I was doing a literature review. Rarely do we see queens that start to lay 37 days after they've emerged and gone on a mating flight. Normally, it's within a few days of returning from their mating flight. So we need to keep that in mind when we think about our management if we encounter a situation where a colony is about to swarm and there are queen cells or there are super seizure cells. And I'll talk a little bit about those later on. So, but first, let's talk about what makes a good queen. Let's talk about queen quality. Because, of course, the quality of the queen will ultimately dictate how successful she is and whether we have problems with her or not. So some things that go into making a good queen, of course, are the selection criteria. There's not a single breeder, a reputable breeder out there, that isn't making some decisions about what is a good queen to breed from and which one isn't. And they all have differing criteria. And so this is a question that you may want to ask your breeder when you're calling. Say, what sort of things are you looking for when you choose your breeder queens? And how do you make that assessment? Some people just sort of hold up a frame and say, yeah, that's a good brood pattern, I'll go with that. Some people actually quantify it. And so these are some things you want to be thinking about. And then once they've made that selection criteria, there's actually the rearing practices when they're raising out the queens that have been grafted from those breeder queens. And these rearing practices actually can have a profound effect on the overall quality of the queen that you may be installing in your colony. So let's talk a little bit about selection criteria. Of course, breeders are looking for survivorship. Are they resistant to diseases? Do they overwinter well? Are they good honey producers, or do they consume a tremendous amount of honey? Are they temperamental? Are they a little bit more defensive of their colony and meet you at the front door compared to another one? The brood pattern, is it a good solid brood pattern, or is it sort of spotty? And then hygienic behavior. you sort of have to be careful here because you may have what appears to be a somewhat spotty brood pattern, but it could be actually hygienic behavior showing through. Hygienic behavior is basically the selection of bees, of a queen, that the bees are able to detect high level of varroa underneath the cap. And so what they do is they uncap the cell, they grab hold of the pupa, they haul it out, and in doing so, interrupt the varroa reproduction cycle. So if you looked at a frame and you saw all these empty cells, is it a spotty brood pattern, or is it that these bees are very hygienic and thus they are removing these heavily infested cells, removing the pupa from these heavily infested cells? So there's a little bit of a balance there. As well as with disease resistance, I think it was back in, I want to say 60s, but it might have been later than that. There was a researcher that actually developed a queen that was resistant to American foul brood. Well, that sounds great. We don't have to worry about foul brood anymore. Well, the problem was that it didn't produce any honey whatsoever. And, of course, that's not necessarily a good characteristic to have in honeybees either. So you've got to find a balance, and each one of us as consumers will weight these criteria a little bit differently. And of course, each breeder also weights these a little bit differently. And so it's worth asking some questions when you're calling about queens. Let's talk a little bit about rearing practices. You've some things to keep in mind. What are the what sort of medications is the breeder using in their colonies, in their mating nukes, things like that? Larva selection. Are they selecting good quality larvae at the appropriate time? The cell builders. Basically, they put the grafted larva into a colony that will draw out those cells, and in some cases, these cell builders will also be the nurse bees that feed the developing larva. And again, you want that cell builder to be chock full of good, young, healthy bees, because these bees are the ones that have the very active glands that are used to produce the food. If you've got a cell builder that's stocked with older bees, those glands, those food glands, are not going to be quite as active. They won't produce as good a quality food, and thus you may end up with a somewhat inferior queen as a result. The drone colonies in the area. How many drone colonies do they have in the area that when that virgin queen emerges and goes off on a mating flight, is she going to encounter a sufficient number of drones? And will they be a diverse genetic pool as well? There are some breeders out there that may have 100 mating nukes and only one drone colony. That's probably not a very good ratio, as opposed to someone that may have 100 mating nukes to 60 drone colonies. There you will have much better drone saturation and increased genetic diversity, and therefore the better the chance of a better quality mating of that virgin queen, and therefore and also more genetic diversity, and therefore you'll have a stronger colony more than likely. The time in the nuke. A lot of places now, of course, trying to meet demand, meet production, have turned into sort of queen factories where they graft, they build the cell, she mates, she's in the nuke, and she's caged and sent off to a customer. How long does that queen spend in the mating nuke to prove to that breeder that in fact it was a good quality mating, that she is productive? If she's only in there for a few days, what kind of assessment can they have of her brood pattern? Not a very good one. I can use Jennifer Berry as an example. She's one that we're selling some queens for this year. She requires that her queens be in her mating nuke after mating for 21 days. So she's got 21 days to assess that brood pattern to ensure that it was a good quality mating, that that queen's not going to start laying drones in that period. And so you have a better chance of a good quality queen from someone like that, as opposed to someone that may have only seen a day or two's worth of egg laying and said, yep, she's good to go, and out she goes. Queen banking, this is a little controversial. Basically, this is where the breeders take mated queens and they store them in colonies, and the colonies tend to them for a period of time. Some people say that that actually queen banking is a way to determine queen quality, that the colonies will only take care of the good quality queens and they'll let the other ones die off. Others say banked queens are inferior because they're caged and they're not allowed to lay right after mating, which is sort of when they need to get laying to stimulate their reproductive system. So it's a bit controversial. I personally do not like banked queens, and I don't really know of a whole lot of people out there that are banking queens. Most of them are planning their breeding and their queen rearing to sort of track the demand of the queens, and they're not storing them for long periods of time. They're basically mating them, allowing them to prove themselves in the nuke, and then being caged up and sent off. So these are some of the things that you'll want to consider. Let me just go back a second to the medications. Why do I have this on here? We know that beekeepers sometimes use things that perhaps they ought not to. That's not to say all beekeepers. That's not to say all queen breeders. That's not to say that any of them are, but I know for a fact that some beekeepers do use things in their colonies that really should not be there. And we also know through the literature, through the scientific research, that some of these pesticides that are being applied can affect the quality of the queen, or also affect the quality of the drones. So you'll have low sperm counts in drones. You'll have queen infertility. You'll have small queen size, things like that. And we know queen size is correlated to queen quality as well. Dave Tarpey at University of or NC State has demonstrated that. So medications can play a role. Let's talk about super seizures. Let's what is it? What causes it? And what should you do? All right. Super seizure, excuse me, is simply the colony is trying to raise a new queen with an existing queen present in the colony. So what might cause this? We always hear that, oh, you'll only find one queen at a time in a colony. The truth of the matter is that's not always the case. Generally it is, but there are times when you can find multiple queens in a quality, and it's actually more often than not in a super seizure case. Super seizure is, again, they're raising out a new queen to replace the old one, and they're trying to replace that old one because she may be failing for some reason. Maybe she's just really old and not very productive anymore. And so they're trying to get a more vigorous queen in there, one that will strengthen that colony a little bit more. Maybe her queen pheromone isn't quite as potent, so it's not spread through the colony. And so they're beginning to think that they may be queenless, and they're raising out these super seizure cells. And it's often one of these daughters, because those queens will be the daughter of the queen that's present in the colony. You'll often see daughters present with the mother in the colony, and that's when you may have multiple queens in a colony. Or you may have a couple of daughters emerge at the same time, and so you could see that as well. So either the old queen is failing, she's not very productive, perhaps the last time that you worked the colony, she was rolled between two frames. In other words, as you try to pull out a frame, she got pinched in between, and so she was injured. Perhaps she was poorly mated for some reason, so she didn't meet the normal life expectancy of a queen, so she's starting to run out of sperm. Maybe she doesn't have the genetic diversity that the colony needs, and so they're trying to replace her for that reason. And again, the lack of the queen pheromone, which is usually because of poor mating or the age of the queen. Queens that mate with more drones have been shown to produce more queen pheromone than ones that have mated with fewer drones. And so that queen that's mated with more drones has a higher QMP, queen mandibular pheromone. It's that queen pheromone. She has a higher output of that pheromone, and therefore would be less likely to be superseded. So what do we do about this particular situation? I'm of the philosophy that you should try and requeen this colony before it does it for you. That's one solution. And if you opt for that solution, you would need to go through and kill off, cut out every single queen cell that's in there. You would have to find that old queen and pinch her off. And by pinching her off, I mean you need to kill her. I've heard stories of people saying they caught the queen, they didn't have the heart to actually kill her off. They figured, oh, she's a mated queen, she's laying, if I just throw her off into the bushes, that's good enough. And the reality is that may not be good enough, that she may find her way back to the colony. So you definitely need to make sure she's good and dead, unfortunately, and install that new queen. And the reason why I tend to opt for that, if we think back to that slide where I had the queen life cycle, we're looking at 16 days before a virgin queen emerges. And then you're looking at about, let's just say, a week to go on a mating flight, and then let's just say a week to come back and begin laying. So really, you're looking at just over 28 days. You're looking at 30 days of that colony not being very productive. And that's a long time to go have a colony go not being very productive. The average bee during the summertime lives 4 to 6 weeks. So basically 4 weeks, 7 days in a week, 28 days. So you're losing in that 30-day period a lot of bees. So I'm always of the camp that if you can install a queen in there, you're better off doing that than waiting for a new one to emerge. But there are some situations where it's hard to know what the right choice is. But in this case, I would try and requeen. You could do nothing. You could wait for those super seizure cells to emerge out. It's a little bit of a risk because you don't know what the quality of those queens are. You don't know if the one that emerges first and goes around and kills off all those other cells, and then when she leaves for a mating flight, you don't know if she's going to make it back okay. And so you may be waiting for her to come back and begin laying, and you're waiting to see those new eggs, waiting to see those new eggs, waiting to see those new eggs, and suddenly now you're really in a hole because you've waited too long, the colony population has crashed, and you've got an extremely weak hive. So these are some of the hazards of letting those colonies produce their own queens. This is another good reason why you should requeen frequently. So basically requeen the colony before they try and requeen themselves. I also used to be in the camp of you can requeen once every other year, and that it was really the queen breeders trying to convince people to requeen every year. I've since changed my take on that a little bit, and I am in favor of requeening every year, and I'll tell you why when we talk about swarming. What is it? What causes it? How to prevent it? What do you do if it happens? Swarming is a colony's natural instinct to propagate. Yes, the bees are reproducing on an individual level. The queen is laying an egg. We've got new workers emerging. That's reproduction at the individual level. But I think if you've been in this a while, or as you stay in beekeeping for any period of time, you'll see that really a hive, a colony, is a single organism by itself. And swarming is the means in which the hive can divide itself as a form of reproduction. And so this is a natural instinct which is incredibly difficult to try and override. In fact, I would say that you can never prevent swarming 100% of the time. The best you can do is alleviate some of the tendency. So let's first talk a little bit about the process of swarming. Basically, it happens weeks, the planning of the swarm happens long before you probably see any signs of it. The workers, immediately before the swarm, the workers begin to run around the comb. They make a mass exodus with the queen. Initially, about 95% of the bees will actually leave the colony, leave the hive, but ultimately about 50% will leave with the old queen. 50% will stay in the colony. They usually cluster near the hive, and this is when we see them and can often catch them. But it's important to note that cluster that we see hanging in a tree or on a fence post or something, that is a short-term event. That is usually anywhere from an hour to maybe a few days. And while they're in that state, they're sending scouts out to find a new home. And once they find that new home, that's when they leave, and usually travel some distance, in some cases several miles. So if you want to try and catch a swarm from your own colony, you're better off putting a bait box with some swarm lure several hundred feet from your colony as opposed to right near it. Because, again, they want to propagate and ensure their success for future generations, which means if they just move next door, that's not really distancing them from the parent hive. That's not really ensuring the long-term success. They want to get away from the parent hive in case a forest fire comes through, a tree falls on the hive. I mean, these are all sort of giving them thoughts, but instinctually they're programmed to travel away from the parent hive. So if you put a bait box right near your colony, they're not going to be enticed by it because they want to travel away from the parent hive. So put your bait box away from your hive so that they have that sense of traveling someplace. So the swarm begins weeks in advance. They'll begin to slim down the queen. They'll chase her around. They'll diet her so she can fly more effectively. They'll begin to produce swarm cells. And they produce quite a few of them. I think the average is something like 20 or so swarm cells in a colony, and these swarm cells are usually hanging off the bottom of the frame, as opposed to super seizure cells or emergency cells, which may be sort of on the face of the frame. Swarm cells, since it's a planned event, usually are hanging down off the bottom, and I've got a slide of one in a second here. Swarms generally occur in early spring when the colony is growing and there's abundant resources available, but they can sporadically occur throughout the summer and even into early fall. I think I read somewhere that about 80% of all swarms occur in the early months of spring. So depending on where you are in the country, down where we are here in North Carolina, we're just coming into swarming season, so the tail end of April into May. If you're up north, it may be May into June a little bit, and that's when most of your swarming is going to occur, but it can happen at any time during the growing season. It occurs because the colony is getting strong, it's overcrowded, there may not be adequate circulation because of the congestion in the hive, and so that's the lack of circulation doesn't allow for the distribution of the queen pheromone. It could be that the queen is aging. Colonies that have had queens overwintered are 3 times more likely to swarm than a colony that a colony that has had a queen overwintered twice is 3 times more likely to swarm than one which is overwintered just once. So that's why if you started a colony last year, it is now overwintered once. If you requeen every other year, in other words, you'd put a queen in next year, now you've got a queen that's overwintered twice, you're much more likely to have a swarming event. If you pop a queen in every year, your queen will never overwinter more than once, and therefore you have less chance of a swarm. It doesn't guarantee your colony won't swarm, but it reduces that tendency. And it's this figure, this statistic actually, that's really made me rethink requeening every other year versus requeening every year. So if your queen overwinters twice, there's 3 times greater chance that that colony will swarm than if it only overwinters once. So the age of the queen is important, the abundant resources, these are all factors that go into driving a colony to swarm. So how to prevent it? Again, I don't think you can ever truly prevent it. You can only reduce the tendency. You can get a queen which is clipped. In other words, her wings have been snipped a little bit so she can't fly. But there's a little bit of a danger here because she may try, and she may only make it a few feet out of the hive, but now they're laying in the grass. So that's not a really good solution. The best is this time of year to stay on top. Look for signs. Look for expanding honey frames with a diminishing brood nest. In other words, the bees are becoming what we call honey-bound. They're bringing in so much nectar that they're actually filling cells that would normally be used for brood rearing. That sort of off balance, that disproportionate honey storage to brood rearing, is a sign that your colony is getting overcrowded. In that case, what I would suggest is putting on honey supers. You could split the colony. You could put in empty frames with just plain foundation. That gives them room to raise brood. It also helps with the circulation because the comb's not drawn out, so air can flow a little bit more readily. You can rotate your brood chambers in early spring. In other words, take the one that's on the top and put it down on the bottom, and the one that's on the bottom, put it on the top. We talked a little bit about that in, I guess it was 2 webinars ago, where as winter progresses, the bees find themselves reaching the top of the hive. So this time of year, or a little bit earlier actually, they're clustered at the top of the hive, and they feel crowded because they like to move up. If you move those bees to the bottom of the hive by taking that top box and putting it on the bottom of the stack, and you've now created a sense of space. So rotating your brood chambers. I mentioned splitting. Now you've divided your colony in half generally. It's a weaker colony. It's less likely to swarm. It's a great way to increase your numbers. It's also a great way to make a little extra money because you can split your colony. You can install a new queen or you could install a new queen into a nuke and sell off that nuke. So you could raise out nukes and make a little money that way. Staying ahead with your supers. And if you see any queen cells, you can cut them out, but don't miss any. But you also then have to take steps to alleviate that instinct of swarming, because simply cutting queen cells is not going to stop them. It's only going to delay them. So you want to make sure you get rid of those. And if you miss one, they're definitely going to go. You can also take these queen cells, these swarm cells, and if you wanted to, make a split and take all those queen cells and put them with the split, and now that split will raise out a new queen, but your parent hive still has a queen, still growing, and is going to produce and be productive for you. So let's take a look. Here's a queen cell hanging from the bottom of a frame. Oops. Hanging from the bottom of the frame. Here's the bottom bar right here. Classic position of a queen cell, still uncapped. You can see this bee right here feeding it. A little bit of trivia that a queen will be fed, I think it's like 1,500 times before the cell is capped over, or have at least 1,500 visits to the cell before it's capped over, on average, as opposed to a worker that's only about 15 times before it's capped over. So they're very, very attentive to their queens. So this is a classic position for a queen cell that's indicative of swarming rather than an emergency queen cell. Here's what it looks like if you're too late. I'll confess, this is my backyard. I was too late last year. It happened. They swarmed. This is the cloud of bees in the hive after they, or rather in the sky after they have left the hive. So you can see it's really quite spectacular. And then here they are after they've clustered in a tulip poplar that was about 30 feet in the air. And this branch is, probably about 15 feet out from the trunk of the tree, which is off the screen here, and making it rather hazardous to try and recapture the swarm. So I just watched with interest as they clustered there, and after about an hour or so, they departed for their new home. They're quite spectacular when they happen, but it's also a little saddening as well. So try your best to alleviate some of that tendency. Absconding. This is similar to swarming with a rather significant difference. This is the bees leaving the colony, the queen going with them. The difference between this and swarming, they're a jumping ship. They're abandoning the hive. They are not leaving behind queen cells. They are not leaving behind a population of bees to continue that colony. They are abandoning their home. And this could happen for a variety of different reasons. Disease. Bees, if they have disease or toxins in their comb, they're very, as we know, keyed in on their environment. If they've got these sort of pollutants building up, whether it be a disease or toxins, pesticides, things like that, they will seek a new home. So these diseases, these toxins, lack of resources, if there's been an extended dearth and they're running out of food, they will take desperate measures and go and seek an area that may have greater resources. This is one of the reasons why Africanized or bees from Africa are so swarmy that they produce abundant amount of nectar when it's available, but resources become scarce, and they will swarm and they will go look for additional resources. So lack of resources, generally speaking, is not a huge factor with abandonment, with absconding. It's usually more disease or something going wrong with that equipment or the surrounding environment. So the question then becomes, can you reuse that equipment? Can you preserve it for future colonies? And the question is not an easy one to answer, because did they abscond because of disease? And is that disease still present in that colony, or in that equipment, rather? If it is, and you put new bees on that equipment, you may find that you're met with the same result, which is your bees absconding on you. So I have had some colonies abscond. I have had good luck putting new bees back onto that equipment, but you do want to inspect it to make sure you don't have things like foul brood, or that inspect it, know your equipment to know that it's not really old equipment. And if it is, maybe it's time to purge it anyway. If you're not comfortable with doing your own inspection, call a bee inspector. Have them come in. Have them take a look at it, and they can help you make a determination as to whether you should dispose of that equipment, or if it's okay to reestablish a colony on those frames and in those boxes. All right. Queenlessness. Queenlessness can happen for a lot of different reasons. Again, perhaps you injured her or killed her when you were working that colony. She just got old. Whatever reason, the queen has been lost, and the colony now is attempting to requeen that colony. So these would be emergency cells. You would see them on the face of the frame, as opposed to that swarm cell that we saw a few slides ago, where it was hanging off the bottom of the frame. emergency cells are on the face of the frame, basically because they've lost their queen rather unexpectedly for whatever reason, and now they're taking any appropriate aged larva, a larva that's between 1 and 3 days old, and trying to raise out a new queen. This has some potential problems because these emergency cells generally do not produce good quality queens. Again, through some of the literature and research, we know that a queen that is raised from a 1-day-old larva will be a better quality queen as opposed to a queen that is raised from a 3-day-old larva. So this is why earlier when I said sort of the timing or the age of the larva is important for queen quality, now we sort of understand why. A younger larva will produce a better quality queen. Well, let's think about this situation for a minute. A colony's lost its queen unexpectedly. They're in a panic. Unlike us beekeepers who never panic, our colony is in a panic, and they're looking for larvae that they can raise out as queens. So they take any appropriate age larva or several appropriate age larvae and try and raise queens with them. So they're grabbing a larva that's a day old. They're grabbing a larva that's 2 days old and 3 days old and maybe even just a whisker older. Well, what's going to happen? What's going to happen is that larva, or rather that queen that was reared from a 3-day-old larva, will emerge earlier. The larvas are older, so of course that queen will mature first and emerge out of that cell first. And we know that generally speaking, one of the first things a newly emerged queen does is go through the hive and dispose of any other queen cells because she doesn't want any competition. This is her colony now. She wants to be the queen. She's going to kill off all those other cells. So what we're doing by allowing these emergency cells to be raised out is actually selecting for a queen that may not be very good because she's raised from an older larva. So in this case, it's almost always better to install a new queen because you just don't know what the quality of that emergency cell will be. Generally speaking, queenlessness is recognized within a few hours, and cell construction will begin within 12 to 48 hours. So they're very quick to try and rectify their queenlessness. But again, the quality of those cells will be questionable. The question is I lost my train of thought there. So they're going to raise out these cells, and so you as a beekeeper, if you want to requeen that colony, you again have to find every single queen cell and cut those cells out of the hive. A queen cell is almost as good, in the minds of the colony, is almost as good as having a queen. So if you try to install a new queen, chances are they will bump her off as opposed to disposing of those queen cells. So you've got to go through, cut out all those queen cells, then install your new queen. If this queenlessness goes unrectified for whatever reason, they don't successfully raise out a queen, as a beekeeper you don't detect the situation, they become what we call hopelessly queenless. In other words, all larvae are well past the age in which they could use those larvae for raising out a queen, and so now they're hopelessly queenless. And within about 3 or so weeks, if it goes that long, you will have what's known as a laying worker, where what happens is the reproductive system of the worker bees actually begins to become active, and they will begin to lay eggs. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. But let's look at a picture here of some of these emergency cells. So here we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right here that they're trying to raise out. as queens. So I would cut these out and install a new queen. If it were my colony, I'd probably try and grab some brood from another hive as well to try and make sure the population of this hive doesn't dip too low. So give them a frame of brood to sort of keep young, healthy bees coming into the colony, and get a new queen into this colony. All right, laying workers. Laying workers develop because lack of pheromones. Basically, queen mandibular pheromone, that queen pheromone, as well as brood pheromone, help suppress the ovary development in the workers. So remember, these workers are female bees. They have all the reproductive structures that a queen has. However, they're not fully developed because they weren't fed that nutrient-rich diet that allowed them to physiologically develop into a queen. But they've got the reproductive system. It's just not developed. So what happens as these pheromones diminish in the colony, it allows for these reproductive organs to develop slightly and allows for these workers to begin to lay eggs, in which they would never do, which they rarely would do otherwise. Now the question becomes, well, okay, so if a worker's laying eggs, great. So why can't they take over responsibility for the queen? Well, for a couple of reasons. One, that worker has never gone on a mating flight, and nor will she. So she will only lay unfertilized eggs, and we know now that unfertilized eggs only develop into drones. And we also know, guys, that the drones don't really do much, and the ladies out there are thinking, yeah, just like my household, the men don't do much. So a colony with a laying worker only laying drones is not going to be very productive. And also, again, although they have these reproductive organs, they will never fully develop to the point where queens have developed because of the changes that occurred when they were in the larval stage. So how do you know if you've got a laying worker? You will see multiple eggs in a cell. Now, I throw a little bit of caution here because a new queen, or I should say a newly mated queen, when she returns from her mating flight and begins to lay, she doesn't necessarily have control over her egg laying, as she will gain that control as she lays more, but initially she doesn't have that control. So you may find multiple eggs in a cell from a newly mated queen, but that should clear up fairly quickly and should not be widespread through the colony. And also, those eggs should be at the bottom of the cell, as opposed to a laying worker where the eggs are on the sides of the cells. And the reason for this is the queen's abdomen, her tail, if you will, is much longer than a worker. That long abdomen allows her to back all the way into a cell and reach the bottom of that cell to plant the egg right smack dab in the center at the bottom of the cell, as opposed to a worker bee that can't reach the bottom. And so what you end up with are eggs on the sides of the cell, on the walls, maybe at the rim, things like that. And I've got a picture of that here in just a second. You will see spotty brood, excessive amounts of drone. So as brood emerges and there's no new worker brood being laid, rather, that pattern will become sort of spotty. And again, these laying workers will only be laying drones, and so you'll see excessive only drone brood as opposed to worker brood. And that sort of shift, that balance, is a good sign. You may be thinking, okay, so if I've got a laying worker, I'm going to hunt through that colony, find her, and kill her off, and problem solved. Well, if you've worked the colony bees and you've tried to find a queen you know that finding a queen can be very difficult. Finding a laying worker is virtually impossible because she looks just like all the other workers. She may be, her abdomen may be slightly enlarged, but not nearly to the point that a queen's abdomen is enlarged. So it's very, very difficult to find that laying worker. And requeening is very, very difficult as well because they see a laying worker as a queen. They think of her as a queen, and sometimes there may be more than one laying worker. So if you again install a new queen, they may very likely bump her off and say, no, no, we've got a queen, even though that queen, quote unquote queen, is a laying worker. So what do you do in these cases? I've tried several different things over the years, and basically I've resorted to just saying, okay, this colony is going to be lost. I'm going to combine it with another one. But if you don't want to throw in the towel just yet, there's some things you can do. You can take your colony, literally tear it apart, and shake all the bees out of it about 100 feet from the location in which that hive sits. And then bring all your equipment back, reassemble it. So now all your bees are 100 feet away from their hive. What does that do? Well, laying workers usually develop from nurse bees. Nurse bees have never left the hive, and so therefore they have no idea where they are on the face of the planet. So when you shake all the bees out, you're shaking out that laying worker, and that laying worker can't find its way back to the colony. Now, the problem with that is you're also shaking out a lot of other bees that may be productive in growing that colony. But that's the risk you take. The foragers will come back to the colony because, of course, they have oriented on it. They know where their hive is located. They will return. Inevitably, you will need to strengthen that colony by adding some brood. So that's one extreme method. The other method that honestly I've never tried, I'm waiting I'm waiting until I have a laying worker. Hopefully I won't get one anytime soon, but is taking frames of brood and constantly installing it into that colony that's got that laying worker. And the thought is here that the brood pheromone will be sufficient to slowly cause the reproductive system of the laying worker to sort of go into submission again, and then allow you to install a queen. But you need to do that over a period of several weeks of constantly installing brood into that colony. Other people have said that installing a virgin queen or a queen cell is a good method. A virgin queen doesn't have the queen pheromone output that a mated queen does, and so she's better able to sort of fit in and blend in with the other bees and then slowly begin to take over responsibility. And after she mates, after she's newly mated, her queen pheromone still is not very potent. It's not really being produced in any sort of quantity. It's only after she begins to lay that her pheromone production really takes off. So installing a virgin or a queen cell and letting that virgin emerge and go on a mating flight has been successful as well. We also have introduced a queen introduction frame this year, in which case you can cage a queen for an extended period of time and allow her pheromone to distribute throughout that colony over a period of a week or two or longer, and then pull the cork on that frame and allow her to come out. That also has been met with some success, but it's very difficult to deal with laying workers. And here's a picture. It's a little out of focus, but you can see here an egg on the side, multiple eggs. These, in fact, are down at the bottom, but they're not in the center. You can see some stuck to the edge here. This one's sort of stuck to the edge. As opposed to a queen, if a queen had laid this, the egg would probably, be like right smack dab in the center, standing on edge. These are sort of on their sides, stuck to the sides of the wall. That's a sign of a laying worker. Drone layers. What is a drone layer? A drone layer basically is a queen which is laying a disproportionate number of drone eggs. And how can you distinguish a drone layer, in other words, a queen, which is only laying drones, from a laying worker? And you can do this by the fact that a queen will lay one single drone egg in the bottom of the cell, as opposed to a laying worker, which will lay multiple eggs in the bottom of the cell. In both cases, they'll develop into drones, but the distinction would be the number of eggs, because a queen will still only lay that one drone egg. Again, this queen would be recognized as a queen, so you would need to dispose of her. You couldn't just simply pop a new queen into this colony. You need to requeen this colony, because they see this colony as being queen right. They're not going to necessarily try and raise out a new one. They may not even have appropriate age larvae to try and raise out a new one. So you need to requeen this colony as you would any queen right colony. In other words, find that queen, kill her off, put in a new queen, and allow her to slowly do it the slow release method, releasing her over 5 to 7 days. You may want to add a frame or two of brood to strengthen that colony, but you need to get rid of that laying worker. What causes, that drone layer. You need to get rid of that drone layer. What causes a drone layer? Generally, these are older queens, but it could be a queen that didn't mate properly for whatever reason. Maybe it was a windy day. It could have been warm and sunny, but it was really, really windy, and so she didn't get appropriate matings. Maybe it was a period of a lot of rain, and the window that she had to go out on her mating flight was so short that she was only able to mate with a few drones, and therefore she doesn't have the sperm capacity that she should to live out her life as she should. So these are some of the things that would cause a drone. Basically, the long and the short is that she's lacking sperm, either from age or poor mating. All right, requeening a colony. This is a little bit different than perhaps installing a queen from a package. Normally, when if you saw last week's webinar, I said just put the queen cage in that colony after you've dumped the bees in. Don't worry about removing the attendants from the cage. I'm going to assume at this point that you've got a little bit more beekeeping experience. You're a little bit more comfortable around the bees. If you're not, then just ignore what I'm going to say here in a second. If you are a little more comfortable, it's advantageous to remove the attendants from the cage that the queen is in. You will have a little bit better introduction success if you remove the remove the workers, the attendants, from that cage that the queen is in. And the reason for that is that, of course, the colony that the queen's going into is, those bees don't know this queen, but the bees, the attendants that are with the queen, of course, are from her colony, so you could get a little bit of infighting that occurs as a result. Removing those attendants cuts that fighting out and increases their acceptance of the queen right from the get-go. You can also use this opportunity to mark her if she's not already marked. It's very good to have a marked queen so you know that she's a queen you installed. Even if you don't mark her with the appropriate color, this year's green, even if you marked her this year with a yellow mark, at least you know that the next time you're in that hive, if you see a queen and there's no mark on her, that's a different queen. Something happened in that hive. So have her, either purchase a queen marked or mark her yourself. You need to pinch off that old queen and install the new one. When I first started beekeeping, I had a lot of different people tell me, pinch off the old queen, wait 24 hours, then install the new one. And the theory was that you pinch off the old queen, and in that 24-hour period, the colony recognizes the fact that they're queenless, and they're more willing and apt to accept that new queen. The problem is If we go back just a few slides, remember I said when a colony goes queenless, they begin to produce queen cells as early as 12 hours after that queenless event. And in fact, I have witnessed this firsthand. We were shooting a video on queen introduction. The day before, I went to the colony, I pinched her off, knowing that the next day I was going to be shooting this video, installing a new queen. Well, when we went back to that hive, they already had queen cells with eggs in those cells. So I've also said tonight that a queen cell is almost as good in the minds of the colony as a queen. So if they've started to produce queen cells after you've pinched off that old queen, you're decreasing the likelihood that they will accept the queen you're actually installing. So what I suggest now is pinch off the old queen and install the new queen in the cage immediately. Use that queen cage as a slow release. We've seen those queen cages with the candy. Allow the bees to naturally chew through that candy, slowly releasing the queen. Here's the difference, though. If we've removed the attendants from the cage, you can now put that queen cage in candy side down. Remember last week when I was talking about package installation, if you were with us then, I was harping on the fact that you always put the queen cage in candy side up. But that assumes that there are attendants in that cage. So if an attendant dies, you want it to fall away from the exit. Well, we've removed our attendants now. We can put that candy end down. And the reason why we should put it down is that sometimes the candy's mixed a little too soft. And when you get it in the heat of the hive, it becomes even softer. It can actually almost turn to liquid, in which case you don't want it to drip down into the cage onto the queen and potentially smother her, which is what would happen if the candy was up. So you want it to drip out of the cage, so you install it candy end down only if you've removed the attendants. If you are installing a queen cage with attendants, always put candy end up. Okay? Attendants in the cage, candy end up. No attendants in the cage, candy end down. Good. You can also use a push-in introduction cage that allows for a slower release. Also, that frame introduction cage that I've mentioned a little bit earlier, and I've shown in other webinars. You can use that as well. That concludes everything I've got to say. Just a little over an hour. Let me go to questions here. I started to answer this question at the beginning, and I'll continue with it. The first part of the question was they went into a hive, they saw several queen cells on the frames. They've moved those cells. They've moved the frames into nukes with some of the bees. And my hive is overflowing with bees, is what this person is saying. So they've removed all the cells. That's good. You've reduced some swarming tendency there. Just make sure, what I would suggest is when you remove those frames, did you put in empty frames? Because that will give them space. But by splitting that hive, essentially by moving those frames out, you've also decreased the population to some extent, but you still say your hive is overflowing with bees. Make sure that queen is still in there. The fact that you're overflowing with bees suggests that she is, but the hazard with removing swarm cells is you need to make sure your colony hasn't actually swarmed yet. If they have, your queen's not there, you've removed the swarm cells, now you've created a hopelessly queenless hive. Now, it sounds like you're not to that point because your hive is overflowing with bees, but I would keep an eye on it. You've reduced the population. That's a good first step. Hopefully you put the frames that you removed, you replace those with empty frames that allow them to either build comb or at least expand their area for brood ring, which may have been restricted as a result of the nectar flow. But it sounds like you're doing the right thing, and admittedly I've sort of lost track of the first part of that question, so hopefully I've done you justice and answered your question. If not, just post again here. Let's see here. Will you talk about poor mating? Hopefully I covered that sufficiently. I let my bees produce their own queen. It's been working fine for me and the queens. Let's see. I think producing bees that are more suited to my area in South Dakota. What are pros and cons of this? Is this a good idea? So basically, okay, so this person's just been letting their colonies sort of requeen themselves, and they're thinking about producing queens specific to their area. I think that's fantastic. There's a lot of good information to suggest that queens, which are locally produced, are adapted, better adapted to their environment. You know, this really shouldn't be a surprise. Again, you folks know me well enough now. You know I'm not native to North Carolina. I moved down from the north. I'm a little more adapted to the weather up there. I'm adapting to the weather down here, but it was a little warm. You know, it's the same for someone from the south going to the north. Boy, those winters are brutal, aren't they? Because a southerner might not be adapted to those long, extended, frigid, cold winters. So there's the same is true with bees, that they sort of become adapted to their local environment, to the nectar flows, to the weather patterns, things like that, that make them more successful. So locally produced queens are a really good thing. And if you can do that for yourself and others, kudos. Let's see. When splitting colonies, would this be a good time to requeen both hives? Will this affect the rule that the new hive should be at least 5 miles away? I don't, first off, the second part, the rule of 5 miles. So the theory here is that if you have a parent colony and you divide it, that the bees that go into the split are simply going to, go right out of the split back to the parent hive unless they're moved some distance away. There's ways around that. I've split several colonies, numerous colonies, and I've never moved them, rarely moved them 5 miles away. I split one not too terribly long ago, and it went about 10 feet away. Here's the thing. When you take your frames of brood, you want to take bees with them. A good portion of those bees, if you're splitting the colony during the day, on a nice day, a good portion of those bees will be nurse bees because a lot of the foragers are going to be out foraging. Those nurse bees have no idea where they are. For all they know, they're in my backyard, you make a split, and now they're in your backyard. They don't know where their parent hive is. Yes, you will get some foragers that drift back to the parent hive, and for that reason, normally when I make a split, I might make the split just a little bit stronger than I might otherwise, knowing that I'll lose some foragers, but you don't necessarily have to move it 5 miles away. The first part of that question, would it be a good time to requeen both colonies? I guess it depends on how heavily you split the parent colony. If it's going to sort of be on the weaker side of things, I'd wait for it to build back up again. But if it's still a pretty good, strong colony, and it won't be hurt too much by a little downtime in egg laying, then it would be a good time to requeen it. Where do I get a new queen when a queen dies or is injured? Queens only seem to be available in the spring. Actually, we can get you queens all the way up until maybe like October or November. And actually, the queens from Jennifer Berry I think we've got some available in early July. So if you find yourself in a predicament that you need a queen, the real problem is availability, because a lot of these queen breeders are backed up. They've got, they just can't simply pull a queen off the shelf. There's a lead time into producing them. And so if their orders are such that they don't have the queens available, you may have a little bit of a delay in that regard. But you can get queens throughout most of the summer. Let's see. When you introduce a new queen, is it necessary to destroy the old, or will the new queen overpower the old? You absolutely need to destroy the old queen. It's hard. A lot of people have a difficult, she's so beautiful, right? She's looking up at you with her little puppy dog eyes. Don't do it, don't do it. But you've got to do it. You've got to get rid of that old queen. You'll have much better success if you destroy her and then install your new queen right away. And again, destroy her. Don't just say, "Oh, yeah, she's so cute. I can't bear to do it. I'll just toss her off into the brush," because she may find her way back and create problems. So, unfortunately, I'm sorry, but yeah, you've got to get rid of her. All right. When combining comb and bees with other queened hives, is there a problem with the moved bees accepting the hive's queen? Generally speaking, if you can, I suggest shaking the bees off the brood, so you're only moving the brood to the colony that's queen, that's got that's queen right. Now, there's some situations here where you might not want to do that because, for example, you've got a weak colony. Actually, a person here in the office, she and I were talking. She had a queen that had a poor brood pattern, but she was a relatively new queen, and we talked about it and said, well, it's probably because the colony numbers are so small that they, with the fluctuating weather this time of year, she may lay a good pattern, but then the colony's so small it can't tend to all that brood, and thus it dies and creates sort of this real patchiness to the brood. So we talked about it some more, said, okay, add some more brood, but you can't just simply give more brood because there are no bees to tend to the brood. So you've got to transfer bees in that situation. And what we came up with and what we suggested to one another was spray down the frame with sugar water and smoke the hive heavily and spray the hive down with some of the frames in the hive with sugar water. And what happens is they get so caught up in all the smoke and all the cleaning that it's a great big love fest, and they're more apt to accept each other and have less fighting. And that worked very, very well in this particular case. So generally speaking, shake off the bees, but there are situations where you need those bees, those nurse bees, and that's a good tip you can try. Pinch the queen off. Where do you put her? On the ground? In the hive? I pinch her off, and I normally either chuck her a good distance, or I'll actually put her in my pocket and take her away from the hives. But generally, I'll just chuck her a good distance. You don't want to put her back in the hive, though. How do I get a queen from shipping cage into introduction pushing cage? Okay, this is a good question. So the queen introduction pushing cage is a little cage that pushes into the comb, and the queen is free to roam around in that cage. So you normally put that pushing cage on a frame that's got a little bit of brood and space to lay. So what happens is the brood emerges, they tend to the queen, they accept her as their own, and she also has space to lay. You can take the put the cage on the frame and then pull the cork from the non-candy end. I said it. The non-candy end, and just hold that queen cage up to the push-in introduction cage and wait for her to walk out. That is probably the best way, the safest way. You could try and release her into like a queen muff or something like that, and then grab her, and if you're comfortable with that, and you physically put her under that cage. But if you're uncomfortable with that, I would suggest just pulling the cork from the non-candy end, letting her walk into that push-in cage is probably going to be your best bet. What is your opinion on artificially inseminated queens? That's a good question. So for those of you who might not be familiar, yes, in fact, they can and do artificially inseminate queens. It's quite a process. I have heard people say that they don't do quite as well as open-mated queens, but I've also seen some research that suggests quite the contrary, that they are actually usually superior because you get a good mix of sperm and therefore good genetic diversity in that sperm, and so she tends to be a little bit better. You also ensure that she's mated properly. Honestly, I don't have any personal experience with artificially inseminated queens, mostly because they tend to be more expensive and I can't afford them. I guess once again there is a question that I have answered in as vague and ambiguous manner as possible. Was it you, Don, last week that I did the same thing to? Can you mix different generic queens into a hive? For example, can you put a Russian in an Italian hive? Well, yes and no. I say yes and no because an Italian hive is, well, let me back up. You threw out Russian as a queen type. My experience with Russian hives is that they can be a little bit more temperamental when it comes to new queens and installing queens. So an Italian hive, I've never had a problem with an Italian hive accepting a Russian queen, but I have had problems with a Russian hive accepting an Italian queen, in which case I would suggest the queen introduction cage or the queen introduction frame that allows for an extended release, a slower release, so that they can acclimate over a longer period of time and thus increasing the acceptance rate. Let's see. Any suggestions for finding local sources for queens? I often refer folks to beeculture.com, and in fact, it's getting to the point where I just about every webinar refer to that site, and if I can get out of this, so I actually had it brought up for me tonight. This is beeculture.com. This is a great way to find local sources for queens or packages, and that is through your local association. So beeculture.com, this is their homepage. Who's Who in North American Beekeeping. Click on that. Doo-doo-doo. Here it is, organized by state, North Carolina, and it will list out, sooner or later list out, running a little slow, here we go, list out all the associations that beeculture.com knows about. Some of this may be a little bit out of date, but if you contact these folks, they'll put you in contact with the appropriate person if they are no longer the contact. It's not a complete list. Again, it's just those that Beeculture is aware of, but this is a great starting point. So you could go to Moore County Beekeepers Association and find out if there's any queen breeders in that association. Or certainly at the state level, usually that would be a fairly local source as well. So a queen breeder that's down in the Winston-Salem or Raleigh area of North Carolina, those queens will do pretty well for me up here as well. So I might want to contact the North Carolina State Beekeepers Association, so you can contact your state association as well. But this is a great starting point. Are queen cells susceptible to mite infestation? Yes, they are. However, if we think about the varroa reproduction, it's tied very closely to, well, they reproduce in the cells. And remember, I think I've mentioned this, I don't know, Don, you've been in most of these, I think, after 60 hours of the cell being capped, that's when the varroa mite lays her first egg. And then she lays an egg every 24 to 30 hours thereafter. and only the sexually mature reproductive female mites will emerge from that cell. So here's the deal. If a mite goes into a queen cell, that queen cell is only capped for 8 days, as opposed to a worker, which is capped for 12, or a drone, which is capped for 14 days. So really, a capped queen cell does not allow for adequate reproduction. So you don't find mites in queen cells too often. That's not to say you won't, but they don't really prefer to go into those queen cells because they don't reproduce because of the short cycle in the capping. A slatted rack helps me reduce swarming. Yes, the slatted rack helps create cluster space underneath the bottom brood chamber. That cluster space helps alleviate congestion. It also helps create a little bit of circulation and ventilation in that colony, which allows for the distribution of the queen pheromone. All of those help reduce the swarming tendency. Do you requeen in the fall each year then? So basically I'm saying requeen on an annual basis, and this person wants to know if you requeen in the fall. The general thought is that requeening in fall is advantageous as opposed to requeening in spring. Again, if you've been in on enough of these, you know that I tend to do things as quickly and as easily as possible, and as a result, I tend to requeen my colonies in spring. Why? Because finding her in April or May is a heck of a lot easier than finding that queen in a colony in August when it's at its peak population. So I like to requeen in spring just because it's easier to find the old queen and dispatch her before installing the new one. I will caution here that I have gotten some queens from breeders on some of their very first dates that these queens were available, which in some cases is early to mid-March. I now, based on that some experience with those queens, wait until at least mid-April, if not the end of April, before getting queens for requeening. That's partially, I believe, because the drone populations are not sufficient for good quality mating in March, like those drone populations of April. So I do wait a little bit in spring to requeen, but I tend to do mine in spring. But again, I should mention that the prevailing thought is that it's best to do it in the fall. Let's see. I just split a very prolific hive yesterday. There were 24 frames of bees in 3 8-frame supers. Whoa. I got to scroll down here. Hold on. Let's see. I put 12 frames in another hive body and left the new split queenless with queen cells. When should I expect to see my new queen present? I'm going to assume those queen cells were capped. Hey, Andrew. I'm going to assume those queen cells were capped, and which means that that queen will emerge sometime within the next 8 days. Let's say they were capped off. Let's say, well, you did do this yesterday. So let's say they were capped just the moment before you got to that hive. So they'll be capped for 8 days. So you could potentially see a virgin queen in that colony in 8 days, but you won't see any egg laying in there for probably about 2, maybe 3 weeks, because that queen's going to have to go on a mating flight, come back, and begin to lay. You may see it earlier. Those queen cells, if they were capped, they could be on day 7 as of yesterday, and so new queens are emerging today. And the weather is supposed to be fairly nice in our area for a change over the next couple of days. So if she emerged today, she could easily go on a mating flight sometime later this week. So early next week, you could potentially see eggs. So that's sort of the various scenarios you may be facing. When would you use a queen excluder? I use queen excluders when I'm adding on a super. if you're using brand new equipment in your honey super, in other words, frames that have never seen the light of or the leg of a bee, those frames have never been worked by bees, I will not use an excluder until those bees have begun working those frames, because they will provide a sufficient barrier and prevent that queen from going up in there. Or, I'm sorry, prevent those bees from going up in there. So only if I'm putting on equipment that's been used in the past will I slip a queen excluder in. Otherwise, I'll wait, let them begin to work those frames in that honey super, and once they begin to work them, I will then slip that excluder in. Just make sure that the queen is below the queen excluder. Now, there are cases where you could use a queen excluder for other situations. Let's say you catch a swarm. Swarms, again, they want to go. They're anxious. They're eager. So a lot of people you'll hear of saying, oh, I caught a swarm. I'm sure I got the queen, but by golly, I couldn't keep them in the hive. They left anyway. What you can try and do, catch that swarm and put a queen excluder under the brood chamber. So what will happen then is the queen cannot exit the hive. And if the queen cannot, unless she's really slender, which is possible, if the queen can't exit the hive, they'll stay put. And eventually she'll begin to lay, and they'll stay in that hive then. So you can remove that queen excluder at that point. You can't leave it on there indefinitely. Don't think you can put a queen excluder on to prevent a swarm, because drones cannot fit through a queen excluder. It'll become a plugged mess. So only when you're catching a swarm would I put that queen excluder on. Let's see here. My queens are 1 year old now. Should I requeen now or wait until fall? Again, prevailing thought is waiting until fall, but I generally requeen in spring because it's easier to find the queen. What's the easiest way to mark a queen without killing her? Queen marking tube. You can release the queen into this tube, slowly push her up against the mesh, and dab her through a mesh with a paint marker. And then she's right there. You can sort of blow on it a little bit to dry that paint, and then you can put her back into the box, or into the cage rather. Can you use a hive as bait box, and what to use for lure? You can use a hive for a bait box. I'm assuming you're going to put some drawn comb in there. Swarm is not very enticed by undrawn foundation, but drawn comb is more enticing to them. For swarm lure, we have a couple of different lures in the catalog. Pheromone lure, there's bee charm that will attract those scout bees. The more scouts you attract, the more apt you are to capture that swarm, because the scouts go back. The more scouts there are trying to say, hey, over here's the best house, over here's the best house, the more likely that swarm will actually go to that house. So by baiting in those scouts, you'll increase the likelihood of capturing that swarm. So there are things available that you can actually put in that bait hive that mimic the come hither pheromone, which is what those scouts are releasing. Let's see here. We're installing a queen after 2 winters, but I'm concerned about splitting the hive. Any thoughts how to determine when to split? I usually like to get, at a bare minimum, 3 frames of brood into that new split. And if I'm only doing 3 frames of brood, normally I'll put it into a nuke box before going into a full-sized hive. If I can get about 5 frames of brood, then I'll go right into a brood chamber and bypass the nuke stage. So there is no sort of time I can give you, but those are some parameters to look for as to when to split a colony. For swarming, bait hive. Yeah, I touched on that a little bit. I would put the bait hive away from your parent hive if you're trying to capture swarms coming from your hives. Again, because the swarm wants to travel, they're not going to simply come out of the parent hive and go right into the bait hive. Put it off a ways, and I think about 15 feet in the air is sort of the optimal, but I've put them on the ground and had some success. If you're trying to bait in swarms from your neighbor, then proximity to your parent hive isn't quite as important, but you're more apt to catch a swarm if it's not near an existing colony, even if it's coming from someone else's hives. All right. What is your suggestion about locating a queen? Look really hard. It's tough. You can be looking right at the spot on the frame where she is located, but if she's got a bee on top of her, you're not going to see her. It can be really difficult to find a queen. I had a colony that I wanted to requeen. They were just a little bit too temperamental, and I went through that colony probably 3 or 4 times, and I just simply could not find her. So they can be incredibly difficult. And it was queen right, yes. So there was a queen present. What I would suggest is if you've got 2 brood chambers, take a queen excluder and put it between the brood chamber and wait 5 days. Because then what will happen is you will isolate the queen into one of those brood chambers. All the eggs in the non-queen brood chamber will hatch. When you go back in to inspect the colony, if you see eggs in brood chamber A, you know your queen is in brood chamber A. If you don't see any eggs in brood chamber A, then you know your queen is in brood chamber B. And that essentially cuts your search in half. And that helps, but there is no real easy way to locate your queen. I have heard of people smoking bees through a queen excluder. So you shake the bees on top of a queen excluder, smoke them, so the bees go through, the queen can't. I've tried that method. I haven't had success with it. If I have a colony that I simply cannot find her, that's when I go to the queen excluder technique and try and isolate her and cut my search down. Hygienics. What types are most mite resistant? Frankly, every single reputable breeder out there is selecting for hygienic behavior. To what degree and their success, that's where you have different qualities in terms of hygienics. Of course, the Russian queens, that's sort of what they're known for, is their hygienic behavior and their ability to cope with mites because of it. Minnesota hygienics, which are the queens being produced by Marla Spivak. Actually, the breeders are produced by Marla Spivak. There's several people that then get those breeders and incorporate them into their own operations. Those are excellent. So those are 2 good places to turn and start looking. But again, every single reputable breeder out there is looking at this. They want to have bees that are mite resistant because it ultimately makes beekeeping much easier. Let's see. I put a new queen in my hive just as if it were the original installation. I removed 2 queen cells from the bottom of the frame. I don't know if I have a drone layer or a laying worker. Is my new queen safe? If you had queen cells at the bottom of a frame, I would say you probably do not have a laying worker. I'm wondering why you think you may even have a drone layer. I'm assuming that it's because you're seeing tremendous amounts of drone. If you do have a drone layer and you did not kill off the queen, which is laying those drone eggs, you may have a problem. So the question is, why do you think you have a drone layer, and are you still seeing eggs? And eggs, there's no way around it. They're tough to see, but you got to get in there. The best way is to hold the frame in front of you and get the sunlight coming over your shoulder so it shines down into those cells so you can look for those eggs. Let's see here. Did I hear you say that size of the queen matters? There are studies that show the larger the queen, the better quality the queen. There is a correlation. It's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you've got a small queen, she's not going to be worth a hoot. It also doesn't mean that if you've got the biggest queen you've ever seen, that she's going to be the best queen you've ever had. But there is a correlation between queen size and queen quality. The larger the queens tend to be better quality queens. Let's see, I should mention these. So, Andrew, you say I should mention that these slits are literally 6 feet apart. What was the first part of that? I'm sorry. Let's see. We've been invited to capture bees from a bee tree. Is it unlikely we will get deep enough to capture the queen? What can you do with these bees since they are likely to be hopelessly queenless? Well, if you get the bees, I assume you're not. Are you going to get brood with them as well? Or are you going to try and cut the tree open to get brood? If you get brood, there's no reason why you can't necessarily try and track down the queen as well. If all you're trying to do is sort of capture the bees as they leave the tree and prevent them from re-entering, now you've got a lot of bees, but you don't have any brood. So in a case like that, I would take brood from an existing colony, shake off all the bees, and stall it into the bees that you've captured from the tree and give them a new queen. But I'm not quite sure the circumstances around that tree and how you're getting the bees and not the queen. But if you can't get the queen, but you get the bees, again, I'd give them brood and give them the queen. That would be my approach. What's the best way to remove the attendant bee from a queen cage without losing the queen? The patient way and safest way, but the time-consuming way, is to pull the cork, save the cork though, pull the cork from the non-candy end and watch the cage in like ideally like a queen muff, but you don't necessarily need one, and watch that cage as a bee walks to the exit. If it's an attendant, let it out. If it's the queen, put your finger over the hole and she'll hit your finger head first and back up and continue to meander around the cage. You wait for bees to sort of one at a time exit until you just have the queen trapped in there. That's sort of the time-consuming method. The other method is that you can carefully, if it's a wooden cage with that metal screen, peel that screen back and go in and sort of pluck out the attendants and or pluck out the queen, dump out the attendants, put the queen back in. But that's, again, assuming that you're comfortable grabbing the queen. If you're going for that method, make sure you have her in a queen muff. Otherwise, you're likely to watch her fly away. And so you don't want that. Do I release the queen from the introduction cage, or is there a candy marshmallow for them to release her? So this is the cage that the queens come in, I'm assuming. There will be a candy in there that they can chew through to release her. If we're talking about the push-in introduction cage, there you will either need to release her, or what happens sometimes is the bees actually mine through the wax. It takes longer than chewing through the candy of a queen cage, but they'll mine through the wax to release her. Will you be putting this webinar on the website? Well, I have recorded it successfully, hopefully, and I think everything's going well, so yes, I will be. So this is from the person that asked about the laying worker and drone cells and is her queen safe. There are dozens of drone cells. Can't find queen, never seen her or eggs either. Dozens of queen cells or drone cells. Are you seeing worker brood as well? Because this time of year they're raising drones. They're raising a lot of drones because we're coming into swarming season. They want those drones available for those virgin queens that are being raised for to take over the colonies that are going to be queenless when it swarms. So dozens of drone cells. I probably have dozens of drone cells in just about every single colony, but I also have worker brood. So that's my next question. Hopefully we'll get this resolved for you before we're done tonight. So are you seeing worker brood as well? Let's see. So this is a follow-up to the drone layer. It's a 3-week old hive. I installed the new queen on Sunday. She may still be in her cage. What should I do? This is in response to lots of drone cells. So again, are you seeing the workers? If it's a brand new colony, this could be complicated, frankly, but we'll see what we can do. I have some worker brood as well, but not much. So, okay, so we've got some worker brood. So chances are, if you've got worker brood, there is a queen present, or there was. So now the question is, if she is still present, that's bad, because the two queens may fight, and your new queen may be disposed of as a result. If she's not present, chances are things will go fairly well with that new queen introduction. If you've installed Sunday, it's Tuesday. She may be getting out fairly soon. I would do my best. I hate going into a colony with a queen being installed, going through that slow release process, because it disrupts the acceptance of her a little bit. I'm torn on this one, whether to go in and do a hunt for the old queen, or to sort of roll the dice and hope that the new introduction goes well. So what I would say is, are you gonna call me up and give me a hard time if it doesn't go well, if I tell you one thing and you should have done the other? I'm sorry, that's not much help. I would. You don't see any eggs. Eggs are real. Have you ever seen eggs? Not necessarily in this colony, but have you ever seen bee eggs? Do you know what they look like, and where to look for them? Because that's really important, because if you have experience seeing those and you're not, that pushes me in the direction of leave your queen in there and don't do anything. If you don't have experience finding those eggs, that pushes me in the direction of open up that colony and do a hunt for the old queen and get rid of her, because I'm afraid for the new one. So give me a follow-up to that, if you would. Oh, that's the last question. We'll just give you a second here to type in. Let me. You won't give me a hard time. I appreciate that. No, I have not seen eggs, but I've tried your method of looking. Okay, so I've tried your method of looking with the sun over my shoulder. Okay, do you have a beekeeping friend that you can phone a friend, and that's got some experience in hunting eggs, and get them over there as soon as possible to go in there and see what you've got. This is really difficult to sort of troubleshoot, because I don't know whether there are eggs in there or not. If you haven't seen them, I'm not sure if it's just because seeing them is really difficult, and so you're not seeing them even though they may be present, or if they simply aren't there. And so having someone that might have a little bit more experience and having seen eggs sometime in their beekeeping career help you look will ease a lot of tension and anxiety here. So if you've got a beekeeping friend that you can call, that would be ideal. Let's see. You're quite welcome, Don. Thank you, Wayne. So here's a person that between my nearsightedness and bifocals, finding eggs is very hard. This is not the person with a drone layer situation. Any luck with magnifying glasses? My dad will get a chuckle on this one. I think he's listening in tonight. He's got these, they fit on top of his head, and they sort of fold down in front of his eyes. That they're magnifying glasses, and he uses them for all sorts of things. I bet those would work wonders for you. You don't necessarily need something that advanced. The hazard here, of course, is I'm telling people to have their sun coming over their shoulders so it's shining down into the cell. If you're using a handheld magnifying glass, be careful you don't do the old childhood trick in frying the ants with the magnified sunlight. You don't want to cook the egg at the bottom of the cell by directing the sun, pinpointing the sunlight down to the bottom. So, but yes, you can give it a go, and I bet you would have success with that. Jennifer says she uses the black Pureco foundation to help see eggs, and that is very, very true. That black background makes those, or helps make those white eggs jump off the bottom of the cell, so you can see it much easier. Thank you, Thomas. Will I continue the webinars in the future? I do plan on it. Not sure what's going to happen next month. Just watch that e-flyer. Let's see here. How often do I rotate my old equipment out and new in? I try and have a complete comb rotation about every 3 years. That's not to say that on the 3rd year I purge all my frames. I try and do a third of my equipment every year, so when I get to my 3rd year, basically I've had a complete rotation. That helps with disease. It helps with things accumulating in the wax from the environment. Whether I put anything in my hive, we know that there's stuff coming in from the surrounding environment, and so that helps sort of keep things clean. Let's see. Oh, so great. So the person that's got the drone layer does have a friend that they can call. Do I risk opening the hive with the queen being newly released or not yet released? Here's what I would probably suggest. Go in there. Chances are you can crack the cover, look inside, and you'll be looking down at that sugar plug. If that sugar plug has been chewed through, your queen has already been released or unfortunately disposed of by the colony. But if you see that sugar plug is still in there and you've got a friend that can come over there soon, within the next day or so, pull that queen cage out, store her in a cool, dark place, take your finger, dip it in some water, and rub it. I assume you've got a wooden queen cage. Even if you've got the plastic, actually, it works the same. Dip your finger in water and rub it across the openings in the metal or the plastic cage. And what will happen is the water sort of will form a film over those openings and give the attendant something to sort of drink and use to soften the candy to feed the queen. Yeah. Once you see some queen eggs, or once you have someone say, "Here, look right in this cell," and maybe even tear the cell wall apart so you can look down in there. Once you know what to look for, you can. It helps, even if you've got bad eyesight. It helps know what to look for, and you can make them out. So that's, if you can get someone over there, that would be fantastic, and I think it'll really benefit you. Bee tree question: is there any way to capture a queen prior to cutting down a tree, or without cutting down the tree? One place wants to keep the tree, the other wants us to capture bees before they cut down the tree. It's really hard to lure a queen out of the colony, whether it be boxes or a tree. So unfortunately, I don't know of any way that's got good success of trying to get her out unless you actually open up that tree and start removing comb. So unfortunately, I don't know of a way to get her out prior to cutting down the tree. So we've got a person here that's got problems finding eggs too. So they use a camcorder with a macro that actually will zoom in, and so they can zoom right into the bottom of the cell, sort of like the magnifier technique. So yeah, that's great. Let's see. What about mold on the outside frames in spring? Remove the frame, replace with a new one. This is normally on the north side of the. Depends on how bad it is. If it's like cool, maybe like less than a quarter of the frame that's got sort of some real, light mold, I don't worry too much about it. Bees take care of it. If it's heavily molded, I'll clean it out and replace that frame. So they can deal with a little bit. So it sort of depends on how badly it's molded. All right. Great idea on the magnifier on the hat brim. This person uses it for, oh, they get them in the fly fishing section of the sporting goods store. For those of you that are having problems seeing the eggs. Let's see here. With no candy, no attendance. So this person gets packages brought in from California that have little mini cages with no candy, no attendance. They have to use a little mini marshmallow when they pull the cork. Yeah, definitely have some method of slow release. You could use a push-in cage or also that clean introduction frame. But those mini marshmallows, if they're working for you, keep on going with them. I have a new package of bees coming this weekend. How many frames of brood and frames of honey can I add from an existing hive to the new bees? How many can you take from that existing colony? I wouldn't want to deplete its population too much. If you could give that colony, the package that you've got coming, 1 or 2 frames of brood and maybe 2 or so frames of honey, that certainly will benefit them, probably without compromising your existing colony too much. But here's the thing, you got to keep in mind the average bee during the summertime lives 4 to 6 weeks. With a package of bees, those bees are all alive, of course. They're in there, so at best, they've got 4 to 6 weeks worth of life ahead of them. Your queen has a week in the cage and then 21 days, so basically 4 weeks before she begins laying. So your package, the population definitely decreases quite a bit before that queen starts rearing, before that colony starts rearing brood and they start seeing new bees from that brood contributing to the colony. So if you can add brood from an existing colony, you will certainly benefit the growth of that package. So I would say if you can get 1 or 2 frames, that'd be good. You can take more if you want. I would shake the bees off, though, off that brood so that you don't get fighting from the colony that you're taking the brood from and your package. When should drone frames be installed? Drone frames, if you're starting with a package, I would wait later in summer. Let that colony grow. If you've got an overwintered colony, there's no reason why you can't put them in right now because they are certainly raising drone. Is it possible to get bees out of a tree, etc., by trapping, fooling them into a new hive whose door is placed right next to the existing entrance? You can actually. There's some. Let's see. You can put essentially a one-way passage onto a tree or a house or something that allows the bees to exit, and when they come back, they get trapped into a hive or a nuke box or something like that. The problem is that rarely will the queen actually come out, unless finally the population gets so small that they decide to abscond, in which case they'll come out. But at that point, it takes a long time for that point to come. So you can get bees, but you can rarely get the queen unless you actually get into that hive and try and physically remove her. Let's see. 3 hives, rotating old frames out, what to do with small amount of wax. So this is the wax coming off those frames that you're scraping clean, or the wax that's in the boxes. You can scrape that clean. There's lots of different things you can do with that. You have a fireplace or a wood stove, or know of anybody who does. Take those cardboard egg cartons, take the lint from the dryer and pack it into the wells of each little egg well, the cardboard egg cartons. Melt that dark, nasty wax down and pour it in over the top of the lint. You've got a fire starter. They make great gifts to the family. So you can do things like that. You can dip pine cones in wax like that. They make good fire starters. Things like that where the nice sunshine yellow wax isn't necessary. What is a push-in queen cage? A push-in queen cage basically is a small cage. They're usually 4 by 6 inches, and it pushes into drawn comb, but sticks up off of that comb. So you can get your queen in there, and she's confined to that space. And it allows her to begin to lay, and of course as soon as she begins to lay, her pheromone production increases, and as a result they're more likely to accept her. Does shaking the bees damage the brood on the frame? How gentle should you shake? I guess if you got really aggressive, it might damage the brood, but you've got to get really aggressive. If you just give them a quick, hard jerk, most of the bees, or a quick, hard snap, most of the bees will drop right off and without damaging the brood. Okay, so someone has posted a follow-up suggestion to the mold on the frames that I talked about a few seconds ago. For mold on the frames, just lightly spray sugar water with Honeybee Healthy, and the bees will clean it right up. Thank you, Joseph, for that suggestion. That's great. That's why I love these things. People always have helpful tips. No matter how long you've been doing beekeeping, there's always someone out there that knows something you don't. And being able to share that information is fantastic. Let's see here. Put up a picture of 260p intro frame. Let's see. Oops. Let me get that off my screen there. 260p. Not a very good picture. Let's see. It doesn't show it. It doesn't show it on the frame. But these are little legs that go into the hole here, 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 and here. So this whole thing sort of presses on to a frame, that's sitting here. This is just a cap that plugs the hole right here. The bees are able to tend to the queen through this sort of mesh area. And so when you're ready to release her, you come and just simply pull this cap from the hole, and she can walk on out. Let's see here. Go back. Come back to here. That is the last of it. It's 8 o'clock. I'm going to scoot on home. Give me a couple of days to get this posted on up to the website, and I'll send you all a link to it. And if you have any other questions in the future, don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you very much, and y'all have a wonderful evening.